Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherri Snelling, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. I'm your host, Sherri Snelling, and we have got so much to share with you in this June episode. We're going to kick it all off with two great authors and psychologists. That's Barry Jacobs and also Julia MAYER. And they have authored a brand new book called the AARP Caregiver Answer Book. And it's a really great resource. We're going to talk all about that with both of them. And then, of course, as we dive into our caregiver wellness news, we're going to focus on June as Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month. And we've got some information to share with you on blood tests and also some brain health tests that you can take, but also some new programs that are happening in senior living and how caregivers need to avoid popcorn brain. What is it and why does that increase your dementia risk? You're going to find out. The other thing is we've got June 21st, which is Summer Solstice, which is the longest day of the year. And we are talking a little bit about some of the science and research that's come out lately on using sunshine or really light like UV and LED type lights to help with health, and specifically some really great research that's coming about for people with MS and also Alzheimer's disease, how to use light therapy to reduce certain things like agitation and pain and fatigue and other issues. You're going to want to pay attention to that. And then, of course, June is also National Employee Wellness Month. So we're going to focus on what are the trends that are happening in the workplace, specifically for family caregivers and the wellness side of things, and what are some of the new programs and things that are out there that might be able to help you. And one really interesting study that I'm going to share with you on women entrepreneurs and longevity. So stay tuned for that, because that's a really interesting study that just came out. And then as we turn to our Well Home Design news, we're going to celebrate World Music Day in June. And it's actually also on June 21st. And we're going to talk about the healing nature of sound bathing and a new app that just came out from Apple and Universal Music Group that uses sound bathing to kind of help with sleep, help with calm, help to reduce stress. It's really interesting. So we're going to share that with you. Also, National Garden Week is June 1 through the 7th. And so we're going to show you some new programs, both for older adults, but also for family caregivers and even for employees in the workplace on how to get your hands dirty that actually helps your mental health. And finally, in June, we have Elder Abuse Awareness Month. We're going to share with you that a lot of the financial abuse for older adults is on the rise and what to look out for. So that's a really, really interesting one. You're going to want to kind of write down some of these trends and things that are happening. So with that, let's dive right into our caregiver wellness news. So for our caregiver wellness news in June, we're going to kick this all off with Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month, which is, something that we really focus on in terms of the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. And the Alzheimer's Association does their annual facts and figures report. It's pretty comprehensive. And it usually comes out in the spring. And we captured some of the latest statistics. So one of the things that we know is we are now in America over 7 million adults who are living with Alzheimer's disease. That has increased, by the way. Last year, it was just a little under 7 million. A couple of years ago, it was 6.8 million. So you can kind of see that it's ticking up. We know that by 2050, we have the potential to be at anywhere from 13 to 15 million. And, one of the things, of course, that we all know is that right now there is no cure A lot of the therapeutics and drugs that are out there for Alzheimer's patients really are only effective in the early stage of the disease, and very often people are diagnosed later in the disease. So, unfortunately, some of those drug therapies don't work as effectively. Although, if you have mild cognitive impairment, which is kind of can be a precursor sometimes to Alzheimer's disease, then those drugs can, work better. And there's no way to slow it down. However, researchers came out a few years ago. They talked about lifestyle choices and changes we can all make that improve our brain health and our cognitive function, but also reduce our Alzheimer's risk. And one of the things they said is that if you follow these 14 lifestyle guidelines, we have the potential to reduce the cases or the prevalence, I guess, of Alzheimer's being affecting our population by about 40%. That's pretty huge. So we know that brain health and prevention is big. So I just share with you some latest news. I've done a lot of articles on all of these topics that we're talking about, brain health. My book, Me Time Monday, is all about neuroscience and brain health and ways that we can really understand better how our brains work and make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our brains and nurture our brains. So first of all, I want to do kind of a public health announcement, and that is that there was a survey that came out that showed 80% of American adults do not realize that you can now get blood tests that can help you to determine your Alzheimer's, not just your Alzheimer's risk, but if you potentially have the disease, what stage you're in. A lot of people still think you have to get a PET scan or some type of a functional MRI in order to get closer to a diagnosis. Well, now we've got blood tests and we've got other things too that are happening. Science is moving forward at a pretty rapid pace if you think about it. And so I wanted to just do a shout out to all of my listeners that if you have any concerns about family members or about yourself, there are now these invasive tests, and you can talk to your doctor about it and talk through why you are concerned about your risk. Now, sometimes if we just have a little brain fog or we're stressed out over caregiving, we can fear that we have Alzheimer's or early dementia because we're forgetting things or we're misplacing things or whatever. So it's really important to understand what are the true risk factors for Alzheimer's disease and dementia? What does that look like? And how is it really different from some of these other things we're talking about, like brain fog? But I wanted to just do that shout out on the fact that the blood tests are available because I think that's a really important, for all of us and for our families. Now, turning to brain health, I mentioned in the intro popcorn brain. Now, in my book, Me Time Monday, I actually call it brain bounce. And I think we all know what that means. It's where we get really distracted and our brain bounces all around. So, for instance, let's just say, you're sitting in a meeting or, you're in the middle of doing some work and all of a sudden it pops into your brain, oh my gosh, I forgot to feed the dog this morning. And now you're thinking, okay, now if you don't work from home like I do, you're thinking, okay, what do I need to do? Who do I call, to get the dog fed or whatever it happens to be? And then so maybe you pull up, an app or you're pulling out your phone so that you can look for the number for your neighbor or whatever. But on your phone, you've got these messages and it's, social media messages and you're thinking, oh, interesting. Okay. You click on that Instagram video and you watch the Instagram video. This is called popcorn brain. It's where your brain is really distracted and it's kind of bouncing. Like I said in the book, it's bouncing all over the place. And we can kind of laugh because I think most of us have felt this, right? Most of us have given into popcorn brain at some point or another. But what's really interesting is there was a recent study that was done that said that when your brain is under pressure, and we are under pressure when we have popcorn brain because we're trying to multitask and think of too many things and we're not staying focused. We're just allowing ourselves to, be distracted and guided into something else. And so when your brain is under pressure, certain neural signals begin to move in sync, much like a well rehearsed orchestra. So, what this means is if you stay focused, no matter how tough it is on your brain to stay focused on the job at hand, let's say, getting through the meeting and then turning to getting your dog fed, or, not looking at the social media and getting that particular task, whatever it is, when we can focus and accomplish those tasks, we actually are reducing potentially our dementia risk. So, it's, the popcorn brain is where we can be. And by the way, you can also be distracted by sounds. So, for instance, if you're trying to concentrate on a conversation, or you're on a webinar and you're trying to concentrate on learning something, but you're hearing all these sounds and you're becoming distracted, car horns, or, whatever happens to be, the trash collector just came down the street, or something like that. And our mind just kind of wanders to that noise distraction. Again, that's kind of similar to what we're calling popcorn brain. So it's fragmented brain activity, and it can lead to earlier cognitive decline. So what we want to do is we want to rewire our brains to synchronize with all these different multiple sensory inputs. And as I talk about in my book, Me Time Monday, our brains are based on basically, and brain health is a lot based around the five senses. So sight, smell, taste, touch, sound. I think that's five. Anyway, and we have to kind of harness things. Now we can have inputs to those five senses. You can smell something like cinnamon buns. You can see the cinnamon buns, in the oven. You can anticipate even the taste of the cinnamon buns. That's all fine, but you're still focused on really just one thing. But when you are thinking about the cinnamon buns, and then all of a sudden your dog barks or your cat meows or something, and then you're distracted over here. So this is what we're talking about. So for caregivers, this is kind of really crucial, because often we get distracted, right? During our caregiver roles, we're wearing a lot of hats, we're juggling a lot of balls, we're trying to keep it all together. And sometimes the distraction is really easy to get caught up in. But what happens is that is going to increase your cortisol levels, which is, something that creates inflammation in your body. And we know that leads to a lot of health issues, but it increases your stress. So if you can just stay focused, get the one task done, or stay focused on your loved one, have that moment of laughter or joy or whatever it is, and then move on to the next thing. Kind of compartmentalize. Don't just be whiplashed into turning here and turning there. This is really critical. So I think it's something that it takes a little discipline, granted, because we've got so much going on, so much noise pollution in our lives, right? With all the chimes and things that are warning us, hey, you have a new email, hey, you have a new text, hey, you have this, whatever, you have a new meeting. But if we can just stay focused and complete the task. The other thing that's really important is from a dopamine release, and I talk about dopamine is one of the four happiness hormones, but we can wire our brains to get a dopamine release when we complete a task. All of a sudden we feel that we have fulfilled something, rather than we just got it 75% done and moved on. You don't feel good about that. So when we can complete tasks, we also start to boost not just that dopamine feel good reward hormone, but we feel good about, okay, I may have a lot on my list, but guess what? I got to check off at least two of those things today, and I feel a lot better. I feel like at least I got something done, right? So these are just some tips and techniques that we can use to stay away from that popcorn brain, which could potentially hurt our brain health and our cognitive function. And I mentioned some brain tests. Now, one of my favorites is the Brain Guide. So if you go to mybrainguide.org, you can take a test. It's not a diagnostic test. It's simply to show you where you may be at in your cognitive functioning. And you can do that for yourself or have a loved one take it. And then if there's concerns, with the outcome, and they will guide you to different articles and different things to think about based on your results, you can also share those with your doctor. So it's not a diagnostic test, but it certainly is another tool to help you understand better how your brain is working. So that's a good one. And then there's another brain test. I'm checking it out, and if it's good, I'll put that link on our episode guide page as well. And then I wanted to move into what's happening in senior living. So senior living has really caught on to the brain health movement, and so there is a senior living community called VI. I think it's called it's VI. And they're all over the place, particularly on the West Coast, but in La Jolla, which is near me in Southern California, they have now a brain vitality studio. And what they've developed is all different kinds of games, which is exercise / gaming, also dual tasking experiences. So again, using different parts of your brain, working those out like you would work out different muscles in a gym. They've got some brain health software they're using. Anyway, it's really important to know that there's these things out there. And if your loved one is in assisted living or even in memory care, you can ask, do you have these types of things to keep my loved one engaged and stimulated and at least help with some of their brain health issues. And then, of course, the new job that's the cool job now in senior living is the brain health certified fitness coordinators. So you've got to go through special training to get that certification. But I'm telling you, brain health, it's everywhere. I just want to do a little shout out because on June 25th, we celebrate the National Day of Joy. I'm really honored to be asked by Comfort Keepers for the third year in a row to be their spokesperson for the National Day of Joy. And it's all about the joys of caregiving and also the positivity in aging. So I love those themes, right? That's just me all the way. It's what my book, Me Time Monday, is all about. Anyway, we're going to have Sadia Gajadar, who is the Chief Happiness Officer. We've talked to her before on this podcast. She was not able to make it for June because she's doing all this traveling and she just got married. So congrats and shout out to Sadia. But she's going to come on for our July episode, and we're going to talk about National Day of Joy. So even though we're going to be a couple weeks late, maybe, the information is still really good. We're going to share with you some of the stuff. Also, they sponsor the documentary that just debuted on June 24th on PBS called Caregiving. It was executive produced by Bradley Cooper. I mentioned that last time on last May's podcast, but we'll have some links again so you can still stream it and you can still watch it. It's really powerful, really good documentary. And then I'll also share with you, because we're talking about joy and National Day of Joy, I'm going to share with you my How to Find Joy in Dementia Caregiving that I did at the Hilarity for Charity CareCon conference and event earlier this year. It got a whole lot of great reviews. And I'm able to share that with you. So I'm going to have a link to that on the episode guide page. And then on the longest day, Summer Solstice, June 21st, there's some new research out about how sunshine. So, we got more sunshine on June 21st, a little bit longer day, but how sunshine and specifically light therapy is really being used now to go beyond what we knew was SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder for people who live in climes that are overcast a lot, and they're not getting that vitamin D, that sunshine into their system, and it's bringing their serotonin levels down, which is your mood boost hormone. So they're using light therapy. Well, now it's being used, and there's a new study that came out on using it with people who have MS. Now, in my book, Me Time Monday, I talk about chromotherapy, which is basically light therapy, and it's really ancient. It's using colors and temperatures to define what are the healing properties. So, for instance, red is hot, right? Blue is cold. So you use ice therapy. So this is not new stuff. We keep talking about new science, new research, new studies that come out, but it's really ancient. We're basing a lot of this on a lot of the ancient practices that are out there. Also, the heliotherapy that the Egyptians did, which was the therapeutic sunlight treatment. And, we see that now in everything from, ultraviolet lasers and red light therapy and some of these other things that are now becoming more trendy in the wellness world. But this new study found that using a UV light box for MS patients can actually reduce what some MS adults feel, which is brain fog, certainly fatigue, and a lack of that energy and that stamina. And so the light therapy can help overcome that. And it really then helps boost you to give you more strength as you deal with your mobility issues, which is the progressive nature of multiple sclerosis. And what this particular participant, and they're still doing the study is still ongoing, but they shared some early results. And this particular participant, her MSDA score, which is the multiple sclerosis disease activity score, which really it rates your severity of MS based on different levels of inflammatory molecules in the blood. Hers was 1 out of 10, which is about the best score you can get. So it's really showing, some impact. Now, I've also seen there are some pilot projects out there right now, some research studies being done on light therapy being used with Alzheimer's patients for sundowning. So if they can sit with a light therapy lamp for maybe 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the early, like lunchtime, it can actually help reduce the agitation and the paranoia and the other physical outbursts and things that can happen sometimes at dusk, which we call sundowning in the dementia community. So lots of really great things happening with light therapy. And all of you who have turned to, again, the red light therapy for anti-aging and, and all these other things, it is really helpful, and that's why we're seeing so much of it out there. And then I want to also just do a quick shout out on Employee Wellness Month, because you guys know I do so much work with employers. I'm really focused on everything that's happening in the workplace. And Harvard Business, who came out with the Caring Company report, which was a pretty seminal report, I think it was back in 2019. So it's been a couple of years. Well, they've updated it a bit, but it was the report that really showed us that, caregiving is prevalent in the workplace. A third of your potential middle and senior managers may wind up taking a leave of absence because of their caregiving responsibilities. And so what this new news was that just recently came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago is that we have now done the crossover, folks. I mean, we talked about how we were going to have more parents to care for than children, right, as a society. And the U.S. Census Bureau said that's probably going to happen in 2032. Well, Harvard just said, guess what? It just happened. In the workplace, we now have more employees who are caring for older parents than younger children. So I'm going to have some articles that I'm going to post that I've done on this. I've done a lot of talks on this, and it's just important to note. Now, when it comes to employee wellness, MetLife study just came out with an employee benefit trends, and it showed that this is interesting. Employee holistic health is down 5%. What they said, and I guess I get it, is that Gen Z, which is our youngest now generational group in the workforce, that they actually have the least holistically healthy their least holistically healthy generation. And that was influencing the results, which is interesting. But all generations were down in physical, mental, social, and financial health. And I love that they looked at all these different avenues of health, because as I said, I've got 7 of them in my book, those including your intellectual, environmental, and spiritual health. But they looked at the main ones, and they also found that hybrid workers are healthier than work from home, remote, or full-time workers. Okay, interesting stat. But there was a 35-point gap in what employers think they provide in terms of wellness and caregiving support in the workplace to their employees, and what employees said they really need. 34-point gap. So the employers think, hey, everything's good. We're doing everything we need to do. And the employers are saying, yeah, not so much. So we need to take a look at really what's happening. I just did a big presentation to a lot of big time CEOs back in the spring, talking about this issue of wellness and caregiving in the workplace and what was needed. And there are some interesting trends that are happening, but we know caregiving is not one size fits all. And that makes it really challenging for employers and HR departments, because, how many benefits and how many programs and how many solutions or mental health apps or whatever it is can they really offer. But there are some answers out there which are really great. I think that there are definitely some things that are happening. And by the way, there's a challenge both for the 9-to-5 typical office workers, but also the shift workers. Think about people who work for FedEx or Home Depot or whatever, and they have shifts and they're not necessarily working 9 to 5, and they have even bigger challenges because being able to get in touch with folks and get people to work, during the night when they're actually at work. Those kinds of things are really tough. Um, and then lastly, I wanted to share this with you because it's very personal for me. As you guys know, I'm a solopreneur. So I also call myself an authorpreneur because a lot of my business is based off my books. But solopreneurs are basically people who work for themselves. And this study just came out and it said self-employed women have better heart health than if they were working for someone else, for a company, or than men who are entrepreneurs. So I'm feeling really good. I'm feeling like, okay, maybe that was one good choice that I made to like become a solopreneur here. But it's really interesting. And the researchers felt that it's because the environment is not only flexible, but a lot of us can create environmental wellness is one of my 7 aspects of wellness. But environmental wellness is really important to our mental health. And if we feel better, feel more calm, feel like we've got more control, because we're working for ourselves and not always having to be pushed and pulled for different things that might be happening within a corporate structure or whatever. When we're calling the shots and we're a little bit more control, we have less stress. So there you go. Anyway, a very interesting study. I just wanted to share that because I thought, again, it kind of relates to my book on environmental wellness and, some good news about being a solopreneur. And just as another note, they found that these women had lower rates of obesity, physical inactivity, poor diet, and sleeplessness. So, yeah, I'm trying to work on all those myself, but it was kind of good news. Now, I'm going to turn to our great interview, which is with 2 people that I have really admired and followed for a long time. And that is Barry Jacobs, who is a clinical psychologist, a columnist for AARP. I love his articles that he writes for AARP, and a renowned caregiving expert. And also Julia MAYER, who is also a clinical psychologist and the past president of the Philadelphia Psychology Network. And together they've counseled family caregivers for over 30 years and cared for their own aging parents for over a decade. And by the way, they told me they've been married for 35 years. So we talk a little bit about what's that secret sauce that keeps couples together when they face challenges like caregiving and all that kind of stuff. But you're going to love this interview. They are just wonderful. And they've got a great new book out. The reason why we talked is they just authored this new book called the AARP Caregiver Answer Book. And it's really great. It's a great resource. It's written in a way that is substantial, like you feel like you get really good information, but it's easy. It's easy to flip to any section: long distance caregiving, dementia caregiving, spousal care, whatever it is that you're going through. And they're going to tell us all about it. So here is my interview with Barry Jacobs and Julia MAYER. So I am so thrilled to have Barry Jacobs and Julia MAYER on this podcast because they have been, thought leaders, experts, psychologists, helping caregivers for, many, many years, and certainly really have their pulse on, I think, what many family caregivers are going through. So I just want to welcome Barry and Julia to Caregiving Club on Air.
Thank you so much, Sherri.
And we're so excited to talk about your new book. I know you have collaborated on other books, but this one just seems to me to be so practical and just gets right to the point. But before we launch into that, let me ask you, where are we talking to you both today? Are you in the same place, or Barry, we'll start with you.
We are both in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. We're right down the block from Swarthmore College. And Julie and I are in adjoining bedrooms that were now our office. It used to be our kids' bedrooms in the same house.
Oh, great. Well, I don't know if you can see a little movement in my screen. That's my little puppy who needs to sit next to me. Otherwise, she goes berserk. So in case you see a little action there in the corner, for those watching on YouTube, you're very familiar with Penny, the co-producer of the podcast. So I really loved your book, and thank you so much for sending me an early copy to review. It's such a great. I don't know how to explain it other than for those of us who are boomers, it's like an encyclopedia of all the things you ever wanted to know, and you can flip to the areas that are so important. But tell me, from your perspective, there's so many different books out there on caregiving these days. How do you feel this adds value to what caregivers need? How does it make it different from a lot of the other options that are out there?
So the AARP Caregiver Answer Book is, we intended as a book length FAQ with about nearly 150 common questions that caregivers have asked us over the years and our answers to those questions. And we have written two previous self-help books for caregivers, and this one is quite different because it really is it gets into the nitty-gritty. It goes over 13 different chapters, 13 different caregiving related topics, and gets into the very specifics of how do you hire a home health aide, how do you deal with finances, as well as all the psychological topics like how do you deal with siblings who won't help you, how do you have a good relationship with doctors and with the care receiver. So we cover the gamut, but because it's written in a question and answer form, it's meant to be very digestible, that people can just dip into it in the chapter that is really pertinent to their situations and get information that they need. And we find that this is really what caregivers want. They just don't necessarily want to read a long narrative. They just want to get the information.
Yeah, I
Julie,
think that's so right. About, gosh, it's been now, I think 12, 13 years ago when I wrote my first book. And I wrote about different, topics in caregiving, and I can't believe how much has changed. Julia, I know that a lot of the content in the book is really based on your personal experiences helping clients and helping family caregivers to kind of navigate all the challenges that are out there. What do you find are kind of maybe like the top two or three challenges, issues that family caregivers have to face that the book will help with?
Well, one of them is perfectionism. A lot of caregivers feel like they need to be absolutely perfect and do everything exactly right. And we hope that with the question and answer format, they'll see that everybody struggles with certain issues. Am I doing a good enough job? What if I yell at my loved one? Am I a horrible person? So the issue of perfectionism. Another one is stress. People have so much stress as caregivers. So we have a whole chapter on self-care. And I know people balk at that and say, oh, I don't have enough time for that. I'm busy. So we have all sorts of ideas in there. You can do them in 5 minutes. You can, some of it you even can do with your loved one, watch a funny movie together and have a laugh rather than have everything be difficult and serious. So that's a super important issue.
Yeah, and I think, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that self-care piece, as we get into this conversation. But I think that is the struggle, right? We kind of leap into these roles of caregiver that we maybe haven't thought about or planned for, and all of a sudden, all the things that we kind of want to take care of for ourselves go out the window. But very. This is really great because you really also talk about you can be a caregiver in a lot of different ways. This lifespan caregiving concept. I mean, obviously, we start life being cared for, we end life being cared for, and in between, we're raising kids, we have spouses, partners, and obviously, we've got now this older generation that's living 20 to 30 bonus years that we didn't get decades ago. How do you kind of address that in the book? And then what are the differences in how you might help or give advice to a family caregiver who's caring for a spouse versus maybe caring for an older parent or grandparent?
so I think in our lives at various points, as you point out, Sherry, we're receivers of care, and then we're oftentimes givers of care for maybe most of our lives. And I think probably most of us prefer to be the givers of care, despite the fact that it's very stressful. I mean, one of the things that I always kept in mind in caring for my mother and stepfather who had dementia at the end of their lives is they had been givers their whole lives, and now they were receivers. And it was really humiliating for them, and I had to be very empathetic for them. And that's something really important for caregivers to keep in mind. As you also point out, there's many different types of caregiving. It's very different to be an adult child caring for a parent who's getting older versus a spouse caring for someone you've been with for 40, 50 years who now has a stroke or has dementia or has Parkinson's disease. The spousal caregiving, all the research suggests, is much harder. Your whole life is wrapped up in this person. Your whole sense of identity is wrapped up in this person. And that's not generally true for adult children who may have their own nuclear families, but obviously love their parents, but their lives are not going to be disrupted to the same extent by what happens to that parent. A spousal caregiver, their life often, I've heard spousal caregivers say to me, my life is over when at the point at which their loved one dies, and so spousal caregivers have a very tough time, especially if they're living with a person, if they're providing a lot of hands-on care. So lots of different forms of caregiving. We offer in this book general advice for caregivers on self-care and lots of other topics, but then we try to get into the specificity of various caregiving configurations: caring for a spouse, caring for a parent, dealing with siblings, caring for someone with dementia, because each of those subjects has its own nuances, and we get into the specifics of those nuances.
Yeah, and Barry, just as a follow-up, I know my mom is 81. I don't think she'll mind me putting her on her age, but she's been saying to me more and more these days how many of her friends are being diagnosed with dementia. What are kind of the special tips that you have, or things that we should think about as families facing this disease, which we know right now at least does not have a cure and really doesn't have really good preventive ways to slow it down or stop the progression?
I mean, a number of things. So one is, it's not a death sentence. Ultimately, it may be something that takes people's lives, but it's a very slowly progressing disease that typically goes on for years and years. And so if someone is diagnosed with dementia, there may be a very long caregiving course ahead of you. And this is where we say caregiving is a marathon, it's not a sprint. That's especially true for dementia caregiving. And what folks then, if they're dementia caregivers, need to really pace themselves. They need to replenish themselves. They need to get support from other people, just as a marathon runner would in being able to go from start to finish. And it's there's going to be a lot of heartbreak along the way, but hopefully there's a lot of joy as well in knowing that you're doing the right thing. The other thing is all kinds of information nowadays, including in our book, about how to handle some of the behavioral challenges of dementia, as well as try to help somebody function to their utmost to the best of their capabilities, depending on where they are in their phase of dementia. So lots of dementia caregiving is a very complicated topic. Dementia itself is a very complicated condition, and so really to help get people prepared to make adjustments almost day by day, hour by hour, to where their loved one is.
Yeah. And Julia, kind of along those lines, it- you know, we know that caregiving is particularly for, again, older loved ones, because we're living longer, is probably a role, let's say, that most of us are going to play, or at least we might be in a support role to the primary caregiver. But a lot of the surveys that are out there, I know Comfort Keepers, I do some work for them, and they just recently did a survey that showed that only 1/3 of older adults have an actual kind of care plan, which is long-term care and maybe end of life wishes, and only half of those have even talk to their families about what their desire is for long-term care. What do you find in terms of your practice? Do you feel that people are more now in tune to kind of the senior care part of life? Are they having more conversations, or is it still something, we plan for kids, but we don't necessarily plan for our parents to get older?
I do think there are some more conversations than there used to be because it's more in the news and people are more aware and mindful about caregiving. But it is a very difficult conversation for most people to bring up with their parent. What happens when you get sick? I want to take care of you. And the parent is usually like, don't worry about it. I'll be fine. I don't want to talk about it. So what we recommend to people is start to bring it up. Bring it up gently. Not at Thanksgiving dinner. Just, bring it up at a off time when the two of you or three of you, if it's both parents, are sitting around, maybe with a sibling there if you have one, that would help too. And say, we need to talk about this because we want to make the rest of your life as good as possible. And so, we want to help you with that, but we can't unless we know what you want and what you're planning. And have you planned, and have you thought about the finances of it? Because people don't. If you can start the conversation, they might brush you off a bunch of times, but ultimately you'll probably get it going.
Yeah. And one of the things that I found with my mom is that when my stepdad was still alive, they had that attitude of, oh, don't worry about it, honey. Everything's taken care of, or here's the the attorney's number in case anything happens to both of
Right.
us. But they didn't really want to talk about it. When my stepdad passed, and my mom then was a widow on her own, she seemed to be more open to it because I think obviously she knew she needed, a partner or an advocate. Do you find that it's a little bit easier sometimes once? I mean, we don't want to wait until that happens, but that vulnerability of being alone after you've lost maybe your spouse or partner.
No question about it. I think one of the reasons why spousal caregiving is so difficult is because you're a team and you are, planning the future together. And then if one of those spouses passes away, the other one is left behind and definitely feels vulnerable. And if they have, some loving children, then I think that is where they often turn. Not always. Sometimes they absolutely want to stay independent and it's hard to negotiate. But oftentimes, especially if you have a good relationship, that is an opportunity to make some plans and to sort of figure out what happens next together.
Yeah, and Barry, you've written so many really great articles for AARP and a lot of other news outlets and done so much work again in this space. One of the things I think that still is sticker shock for a lot of families and family caregivers is the cost of care. And then you find out, yeah, Medicare doesn't cover this necessarily, right? So what are the things that you're finding in terms of that financial planning piece? What advice would you give to families? Because boy, it can sure deplete your savings really fast.
Yeah, AARP did a study some years ago, which found that the average caregiver spent about $7,200 out of pocket on caregiving expenses per year, and that's probably the low end, in my opinion. That's there are folks that, as you point out, spend tens of thousands, and not hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of caregiving, and many bankruptcies that occur in this country are for medical reasons. People have to pay for care for a loved one. So it's very important for folks. There's lots of things to do in caregiving, uh, all sorts of hands-on tasks. But unless they get a handle on the finances, they're going to perhaps set themselves up for some long-term negative consequences. We're big believers in sitting down with an elder law attorney or some other financial planner who can help look at all your finances and think through what the cost of the likely care needs are going to be. Many times, if someone's going to need to go into a facility, if they don't have lots of money to pay for that facility, which is in this day and age is to the tune of over $120,000 a year generally. Then folks are going to wind up on Medicaid. But to go through what's called the Medicaid spend down, to spend all of your assets until you qualify for Medicaid, is complicated, and we strongly recommend that people confer with an elder law attorney to tell them exactly how to do that so that it works. They're not going to have tax problems later. They're not going to have someone questioning what they did with their parents' money. So all of this is extremely important. It's also very important as part of long-term planning for parents to have advance directives, as that includes designating who would make healthcare decisions for them, but also who would make financial decisions for them in the event that they can't make decisions for themselves. So that too is a big piece of the overall financial planning. And then, I think realistically, people have to determine where their money goes. I mean, if they have multiple family roles, and most of us do, we may have responsibilities to a spouse or responsibilities to children. We may have our own mortgage. We're not simply just socking our money into the parents' care. It's just not feasible. And so where do we draw the line as to how much we can give and how much we have to hold for ourselves? Again, having a qualified financial planner or having an elder law attorney is very helpful for that.
Yeah, and you touched on something I think that's so critical in family caregiving, and that is getting the help of experts, right? Kind of creating this care team around you as a family caregiver that can help guide you on a variety of different things, particularly the financial legal pieces. But Julia, we touched upon burnout, and I think that you can certainly be physically burned out from your caregiver role, but I think a lot of the burnout really comes from more of that emotional side of caregiving. What are the things that you're seeing, and what are the solutions to help caregivers? Because as we said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. How do we help caregivers find that balance so that they don't feel that burnout. And we hear it both from the family caregivers, but also the professional caregivers as well.
Absolutely. Sherri, you're completely right that, the burnout is emotional as much as it is physical, probably more so. Because when you're taking care of someone, it's intense, and you know that their disease is progressing, and you're worried about whether you can handle the next stage of the disease, and you're having anticipatory grief, and you're worried about what happens when they die, and how scary that is. So all of that contributes to burnout. And what we suggest to people is build a community, find a community. You want to talk to the care receiver about certain things. Grieve together if that's possible, but you also need other people. You need someone to complain to. You need someone who's been through it, who understands how hard it is, because people who haven't been through it do not really understand how hard it is. And, church communities, that kind of thing there are support groups, there are organizations within religious institutions that might deliver some groceries or pick up pharmacies, medications for you. Um, Online, there are tons of support groups. AARP has this amazing caregiver section on their website. It's huge, and you can find, Barry's articles, but you can also find tons of communications, people complaining or solving problems that you yourself might have. So it's about not being alone, and it's about trying to find ways to take some time to replenish yourself, even if it's taking a little walk around the block, listening to some music, doing some meditative breathing or yoga, anything that gives you a little bit of perspective so you can step back and not be so in it all the time.
Yeah, and you touched upon something that I really like that you said, and that is maybe turning to support groups, turning to maybe some faith-based groups that can help. A lot of people have apps on their phone. They can deliver the groceries, deliver the food, deliver the medications from the pharmacy, whatever. But that's going to be a drop off. And if it's going to your loved one who may not get a chance to talk to people during the day, when you have Meals on Wheels or you have someone from a faith-based group dropping something off, you can have a conversation too. And I like that human social health part of what you said, which is so critical, I think, particularly for our older loved ones. And we know 1 in 2 older adults experience loneliness, and that becomes then a big risk factor for all of us in terms of our overall health. I want to get to a question that kind of perplexes me, and I'm hopeful that you too can help me and help our listeners. And I'm going to take it from 2 perspectives. I want to take it from a factual, how to find resources perspective, and then I want to take it from more of an emotional. So the question is that there are quite a few resources out there, lots of programs, lots of ways that people can find help, and yet I feel like caregivers don't necessarily reach out. And I've experienced this in my own personal, and I know my friends listen to this podcast. So, yes, I'm talking about you. Some of them have gone through their caregiving experiences. They know I've got a background in this, but they haven't called me and asked for advice. And it's like, it's not that I feel bad, it's I want to help. But from a factual standpoint, what do you see? Do you see that caregivers are just hesitant to reach out, or is it because the communication is so bad they don't even know these things exist?
I'll take the factual piece. I'll let Julie do the emotional piece. But so I think at the beginning, there's sort of like that deer in the headlights kind of phenomenon where people say, "Oh my Lord, suddenly my mom is old," or suddenly, whether maybe someone's had a sudden medical event like a heart attack or a stroke, and they're plunged into this and they are really overwhelmed and they're not sure what to do, and they're very focused on the needs of the person they're caring for. They're not thinking about whether they are or aren't a caregiver. So there are multiple challenges. One is people have to define themselves as caregivers, and that doesn't happen a lot, particularly early on. Number 2, people have to have some clue as to where to find resources. And even though you and I, many people have been working on building resources for caregivers for decades, lots of folks still have not the first idea of where to turn for information. And that's, that to me is very distressing, having written as much as I've written all these years, and, including this new book. But I also think that there are some very big emotional reasons why, even if people know what the resources are and know that they're a caregiver, why they won't turn to them. So, Julie, you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, I think a lot of caregivers feel like I should be able to take care of my mother by myself. She's my mother. She took care of me when I was a baby. Why can't I take care of her? And if I can't, maybe I'm failing. Maybe I'm really not that great a person. So there's this tremendous pressure that caregivers put on themselves to handle everything. And then also often to do it perfectly. And nobody's perfect and you can't handle it all. And as Barry said, it's a marathon. You need to say yes when people offer help. Even if it's help you don't need, say yes anyway. And then ask for specific things and remember that sometimes when someone says, can I help you? And you say, well, I would love it if you'd go to the pharmacy and pick some, my mom's medications up. They feel good doing something for you.
Mm.
The caregivers feel like, that's their property. They feel they're the caregiver. They feel good, but no one else is going to feel good helping them. And that's not true. It actually makes other people feel, like there's some meaningfulness to reaching out and taking care of a caregiver to some degree. So it's about letting go of these preconceived notions and not having these expectations that you have to do everything. And when you do that and you do have a community and you have some people who show up and you pull in your cousin or the neighbor or whoever, it feels so much better. You just have to trust us on this. It really does feel better to have more people.
Yeah, I think that initially people don't believe it's going to feel better. Initially, they feel like they're going to burden somebody else. They're
Yes.
going to feel ashamed, and they're going to feel like somehow they're as Julie said, they're falling down on the job, and they don't want to have their own self-criticism about that. They don't want others to criticize them for that, and consequently, they don't reach out for help and they turn down the help that's offered to them. And that, in our opinion, is tragic, because if you're running a marathon, when you get to water station at mile 5 and people are waving water bottles at you, you better
Don't
take
say
it.
no.
Otherwise, you're not going to make it to the end of the race. And
Yeah.
most people don't want to burn out before the end.
Well, I do a lot of work in the dementia community and with different organizations like Alzheimer's Association. Barry, I know you do too. And sometimes the person who's diagnosed, they feel a stigma and they say to their loved ones, I don't want anyone to know.
Yes.
And then you have that burden of, okay, I've got to keep this secret, but then how do I reach out? And one of the things that just hurts my heart is so many of these family caregivers that I meet after they're done caregiving say, I wish I'd known the Alzheimer's Association did this, or I wish I'd asked my employer about this or whatever. What advice would you have for those family caregivers?
Well, initially, you try to respect the care receiver's wishes to keep it secret. It is hugely stigmatized. I mean, people stop going out with couples, they don't want to see the person with dementia. It's awful and it's very isolating. So one thing that a caregiver can do is go on sites where there are support services for caregivers like AARP and at least communicate online. And it doesn't have to be it can be anonymous. So, or these people don't know you, so you can say whatever you need to say and take in whatever information. But down the road, it isn't sustainable. So then the caregiver has to say to the care receiver, I want to take the best care of you that I can, but in order to be able to do that, I need help. So I'm going to have to bring in some help so that I can do the best job for you as possible.
Yeah, that's really hard. People have to really have courage to do that, because they feel like, again, what they're doing for themselves, they're doing in contradiction to the care receiver's wishes, and that's very tough. But it's true. It's not sustainable to keep it a secret and not to seek help for yourself, because that's what the care receiver wants. It's the same thing with the care receiver. Doesn't want anybody coming to the home to help them,
Right.
but only you. They only want you to help them. And if they need a shower, you got to do it. And if they need to be picked up off the floor, you got to do it. I mean, ultimately,
The big
that's not.
one, by the way, Barry. I hear that so often. Either you get them to agree maybe to have a personal care worker or someone come in to the home, and then they fire them. So you come home from work and they fired the person.
Right. And you, even though you want to help the older person or whoever is needing care save face, you can't do it at the expense of your own health, and you can't do it at the expense of your own modesty. I mean, I wasn't about to shower my mom when she had dementia, right? If she was going to get a shower, she had to have a personal care aide. She had to agree to that. Well, she didn't like the idea of personal care aides coming into her home, so it took a fair bit of negotiation to make that happen. But the idea is we defer to the older person receiving care as much as we can because we want to preserve their dignity, but not if it's to such an extent that we end up undermining ours and undermining our health in the process.
Yeah. And if you have a loved one with dementia, it is sometimes hard to communicate. But I've also found that family caregivers tend to just accept what their loved one wants and don't share, well, this is how it's going to affect me. And I think once you have that dialogue, sometimes then your parent or whomever is receiving the care, their eyes are open because they didn't think about it from that perspective, right? So now they might be a little bit more flexible in how to do it.
I mean, I'd like to think that that kind of conversation could be enlightening for the care receiver, but I also know that it's one of the consequences of dementia is that people lose the capacity for
Yeah.
empathy, and sometimes they can't put themselves in the shoes of somebody else. They just are thinking about their own needs and their own comfort and their own preferences. But hopefully, in having that conversation, they'll be able to agree that yes, you need help. Let's bring help in the home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've covered so much, and hit upon so many of the great themes of your book. Is there anything we haven't covered that you feel is really important for our listeners to know?
Um, yeah, I would say that be kind to yourself. If you're a caregiver, it is so hard. It is so stressful. You're dealing with life and death issues. You're dealing with someone's decline. You're dealing with all your emotions, your love for the person. Maybe you also have negative feelings toward them because they were a difficult parent when you were younger. It's one of the hardest things you can do in your life. So try to go easy on yourself and try to say to yourself, I'm doing a good thing. I'm doing the best I can. Most caregivers feel like it's a very meaningful thing to take care of a loved one. And even after that loved one has passed away, it feels like one of the most important things they've done in their lives. So our book is supposed to help them make that happen. It has so many answers to so many questions. It's like a roadmap. And the idea is make this experience as fruitful, as positive as it can be, so that when you come away from it, you can feel good.
Yeah. And I would just add that the last chapter of the AARP Caregiver Answer Book is all about the last days of caregiving when your loved one may be dying, but also the adjustment afterwards. And that adjustment afterwards goes on much longer than most people believe it will. They figure they'll just bounce back and go back to their old lives. In our experience, people don't go back to their old lives exactly the way they were. They've been changed by caregiving, that their old lives don't fit them as well as they used to. And then it becomes a question of how do they find meaningful activities that will maybe not have the kind of life and death importance of caring for somebody, but still enable them to really make a difference in the world, to make a difference in someone else's life. And so, in our practices, we see people who are caregivers through caregiving, and then after their loved one dies, we continue to work with them to help them make this transition. And sometimes it takes another year to 2 years.
Yeah, and I love that you included that because so often once a loved one has passed, we kind of like, okay, everything's fine, back to normal, whatever
Mhm.
normal is, right? And I think it's so important to talk about that. And, I know that when I've done educational webinars and things for family caregivers, understanding those 5 stages of grief and that they can happen at diagnosis and you can cycle back through it again, I think, at death. So you're kind of bouncing back and forth between a lot of those 5 stages and then getting to that 6th stage, Barry, that you just mentioned, which is finding meaning again, finding purpose, filling that hole in your life that was taken up by caregiving. One thing I thought was really interesting, there was a study done several years ago that showed that caregivers are 50% more likely to volunteer to do things, and especially to help other caregivers, because they have that care gene, I guess, and I thought that was really beautiful, because it's like kind of paying it forward, your experience and what you've learned.
Yeah, we've seen people who, after having finished caring for one family member, will care for another, or maybe another one after that. We call them serial caregivers. They go around caregiving people. But we've also seen folks that will volunteer for hospice, because again, that's very meaningful, literally life and death work, to sit and talk with someone who may be dying, but also to talk with their family members who are trying to be there for their family member. So yes, I think caregivers learn a lot of skills that later on could be helpful to other people, and they also have a sense of how important it is for us to be good to one another with some of these very difficult issues, like living with illness, living in a diminished capacity, and then ultimately facing death.
And
Yeah.
they learned how meaningful it is to care for another human being. And that feeling kind of stays with them. And that's why often they find another way to be caring.
Yeah. Well, I know we're just about out of time, but I just want to ask you quickly, because you had mentioned before we went live here that you've been married for 35 years. Any advice in terms of, you've both been caregivers, I know, for your spouses, you've got children. Any advice on how to support each other and have those conversations with family from your perspective?
You have to try to make time for one another to talk. When we were taking care of Barry's mom and stepfather, we would take a walk, we would sit together, we would sort of process what we've been through, and get some feelings out. It's so important to remember that you're a team, and that even if, every couple has irritations or whatever, um, just remember you really are on each other's team, and you're supporting one another, and you, you remain mindful about that, and you make that an important feature of your relationship.
Yeah, and I'll just say that during the time that we were caring for my mother and stepfather, Julie was amazing in helping me gain perspective. I got really lost in the details of caregiving, and Julie helped me see that perhaps I was feeling too guilty, perhaps I was trying to do too much, perhaps I was trying to be too perfect, because they get back to the perfectionism theme, and that I needed to be kinder to myself. And so I thank her. I thank you, Julia, for helping me with this, because it made a huge difference for me in helping me not burn out in that process.
Well, thank you both for being on the podcast. It's been so enlightening, really great information. I'm going to hold up the book that you sent me, the AARP Caregiver Answer Book. Barry, tell us just quickly, where can we find, where to buy the book, and also more information about both you and Julia?
So the book is available through the usual book outlets, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, certainly from AARP and from the Publisher Guilford Press, but hopefully in bookstores as well. We have a website. It's www.caregiveranswerbook.com. It has information about the book, as well as the other books that we've written, and our biographical information and ways of contacting us if you'd like to reach out to us. So that's www.caregiveranswerbook.com.
Well, thank you both so much. It's just been delightful having you on the podcast together.
Thank you so much,
too.
Sherri.
So wasn't that a great interview with Barry and Julia? They are just so insightful. And I love the yin and yang. Barry's got all the statistics and some of the practical side, and Julia comes in with more of that emotional, what we truly think about in psychology, of helping that emotional side of what we're doing, particularly in caregiving. We're going to have a link to where to buy the book, but also a link to where to find them and find all of Barry's great articles and some of the other work that they're doing on the episode guide page. So let's now turn to home design news. And as I mentioned, June is also World Music Day on June 21st. And, we just recently lost Brian Wilson, the genius behind really the Beach Boys. Not only was he one of, obviously, the Beach Boys singers, he played, I think, bass, but he was really an innovative composer and creator of music. He's been known to have influenced so many people, including Paul McCartney and Elton John and many, many others. He died just before the age of 83. And he died with dementia, which was interesting. He was only diagnosed the last couple of years of his life. And, he had suffered from mental health issues and particularly depression for a great majority of his adult life. He also, of course, as many musicians do, they get into that drug scene. And we know that depression and drugs can certainly exacerbate your Alzheimer's risk. But it's interesting. And I wrote a blog on my website. I'm going to have a link to that blog, but you can read about musicians and their risk factors related to Alzheimer's. It's actually supposed to reduce your risk, but as I said, you can mitigate that protective factor of music by doing drugs and maybe having mental health issues. But it's an interesting blog, and I think you'll find some really interesting things in it. And then, there was a recent news that came out, and as you guys know, I write in my book about sound bathing. I'm a huge fan of sound bathing. If you haven't done a sound bathing session with somebody who really knows what they're doing, it's really spiritual. It taps again into our multisensory health, but it's very spiritual. And I would really, if you can get to a session, sometimes you can find them for, $60, $80, similar to maybe like a massage. It's really worth it. It's very calming. Boy, talk about reducing stress. I mean, it just floats right away. So anyway, but what I found interesting is this little news bit came through on my feed. Apple and Universal Music Group launched Sound Therapy, which is essentially like a music therapy app, but it uses sound bathing sounds. And, sound bathing is where you have not drums, you have bowls and things, and they rub their fingers on the bowls. Sometimes they use different, tools to create these beautiful gong sounds, and it's just really beautiful. Anyway, you may want to check that out. I'm going to have a link on the episode guide page. And then also, we did a podcast interview with Rachel Francine and Andy Tubman, who were the co-founders for SingFit. Now, SingFit is a music therapy program designed specifically for people with dementia. You're going to want to check out that interview because they just really talk about a lot of really great things that you should know about music and dementia and health and wellness and all that. And then I also mentioned that National Garden Week was June 1 through 7. Shout out to my mom, who I think is like the world's best gardener. And she has talked about how her garden has really brought her a lot of peace. She feels kind of a spiritual connection when she's in her garden. It de-stresses her, and that's her thing. Me, I love plants. I love biophilic design. You see some of the plants I have behind me, but I have a tough time keeping them alive. I have a black thumb, not a green thumb. So I have to pick wisely what I'm doing, but my mom, everything in her garden is thriving. Anyway, I just want to do a shout out because I mentioned VI, which is the Senior Living Communities. I think I'm saying that right. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but VI at the Little Hill Village. They're actually doing some really great things where they're bringing in, they're doing intergenerational activities with their senior residents and also younger kids in elementary school. And they're taking them to the Coastal Roots Farm, which is there in San Diego. And they participate in healthy eating and sustainability and farming, and they all get their hands dirty. And the seniors talk about, nutrition as you age and what to think about for brain health. It's a cool program. But I thought that was interesting. And then I came across something as I am doing a lot of research for employers and wellness benefits. And I came across an organization called Gardenuity. We might even get them on the podcast one of these days, but that was really fascinating. They have created a program. Now, you can also tap into this just on your own. You can get an individual session, I guess, with them. But they do workshops for employees, anywhere from 50 to 500 employees at a time. And they get, the employees out there planting things and getting your hands dirty. Again, getting your hands into the dirt is something that's very soulful. It connects our brain to nature, and it releases all of those really feel-good hormones that I talk about in my Me Time Monday book. because we have that connection to nature, which we don't. We're touching things that are metal and plastic, and we're not outside, we're inside, and we're not getting our hands dirty. And we need that as human beings, and our brain health really needs that. So this is a really cool little program, and they work with a lot of different employers. But one of the things that they talk about is, it connects that ancient brain to nature, which is part of brain health that I write about a lot. Also, it's a chance to work with teams in different ways, keeping these plants alive, because you don't just do it for one day and it's done. It's like these elevated plant beds stay in the workplace, and then you kind of have to take care of them, right? And so also it's tactile, so touch, which is an important sense that we often, again, we're not feeling natural things. This is something very natural. And also you can watch something thrive and grow. And I think for caregivers, that's a really important point. Very often we're dealing with things that might be in decline, or watching loved ones whose health is maybe, disappearing. And it's very hard emotionally and mentally to deal with that. So when you can get back into nature and watch things grow, it kind of counterbalances the feelings that you might have. And also it brings you back around to the cycle of life. Everything is born and grows and then, goes away, but we can recycle, we can do things that make it sustainable or whatever it is. So it's kind of interesting. But it's just a catalyst to talk also about food as medicine for employee health. So it's a really cool program. I thought I'd just, do a shout out to them and bring that to you. And then, as I mentioned earlier, June is also World Elder Abuse Month. And financial abuse is one of the bigger types of abuse. I mean, we think about physical abuse and some of the horrific things that we know can happen to our older adult population. But financial abuse is one of those things it's horrific, but it's often, not seen by everybody. We don't hear a lot about it. So I wanted to share with you, because there was a new AARP survey that came out that said that, and also let me just make this comment. As caregivers, we want to keep our loved ones safe, right? And if we're helping them stay at home, or even if they're in senior living, but let's just say they want to stay at home as long as possible, we want to get them connected to technology because we know that's going to keep them from being socially isolated. So we've got that connection going, and we want them to learn digital tools if they want to, which a lot of our older population really loves learning new things, particularly on, whether it's, the smartphone or mobile or their internet or their iPads or whatever. But we have to keep them safe. And we know there's a lot of bad actors and fraudsters out there coming at all of us when we are living our lives digitally, right? So we've got to, make that part of our caregiving role, protecting, parents, grandparents, whomever it is, from all these fraudsters. Now, gift cards are still the number one way that the fraudsters go after loved ones. They do these grandparent scams and say, oh, just send a gift card. I'm in jail in Mexico, or whatever it is. And what's really scary, and I'm going to do a shout out in a minute to a podcast we did, but they're also now voice cloning grandchildren's voices off of TikTok and other social media. So you really don't know that it's not your grandchild. It's pretty scary. But the one that's really growing is around tech support. So I wanted to bring this up because we want to keep our loved ones technically enabled and connected, but now tech support scams are like on the rise. And so we know older adults are 6 times more likely than younger adults to lose money to a tech support scam. Okay, that probably makes sense, I guess, because they're just less in tune. They're not digital natives. It's something that they've adopted, so they're not in tune with some of the other things out there that maybe the younger generations know. Oh, don't do that. Don't go there. Don't push that button. We don't know that if we haven't grown up with this stuff. Also, older adults are being impacted by the growing incident of healthcare data breaches. That's a scary one. And hackers and IT workers in that area. And the number of older adults reporting losses of $100,000 or more has increased 3 times since 2020. Oh, really? 3 times? Oh my gosh. $100,000. That's like scary. So I'm going to do a shout out to a podcast interview that we did with Liz Lowy of EverSafe. She used to be a district attorney in New York, and she was actually in charge of the elder abuse financial scams and just elder abuse in general. Now she's a co-owner and co-founder of this company, EverSafe, which can help protect your loved ones. So you want to check that out. But we talked about grandparent scams, and it was fascinating what she shared with us. And you want to check that out. It's season 2, episode 13, Liz Lowy, EverSafe. Really, really great interview. And then I just want to do a quick shout out before we end this podcast that hopefully you're subscribing to our YouTube channel, because every Monday I'm posting a new Me Time Monday wellness hack, which we call our self-care in 7 minutes, which is all you need to help improve your health in all those 7 different areas of wellness I talked about. And we have 4 new ones that we posted this month. One is on music and brain health. The other one is on blue wellness. What does that mean? Okay, interesting. You can check that out and find out. The sunshine diet. And it's more than just a diet, because diet, according to Hippocrates, is how we live our lives, not just what we put in our mouths. And then, of course, Nature's Cleanse, which is all about hydration, because National Hydration Day was June 23rd. And by the way, 50% of American adults are dehydrated. So you want to check that one out. And thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Lots of stuff we packed in for this June episode, but we really appreciate you being here. So thank you. Thank you for joining us on this episode. A reminder, you can find more information in my book, Me Time Monday, The Weekly Wellness Plan to Find Balance and Joy for a Busy Life, or visit MeTimeMonday.com or CaregivingClub.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club on Air. Please hit the subscribe button to listen to us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top and email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening, and take care and stay well.